When I'm a 21-year-old Baha'i in 1974, I go on the prescribed once at least in a lifetime pilgrimage to the faith's holy places in and around Haifa and Akka in Israel. Now, I bet when most of us think of pilgrimage, we think of throngs of people walking around and around and around the Kaaba, or binding your blisters every night as you walk along the Santiago de Compostela trail, or maybe even bleeding knees as you crawl up stone steps somewhere, or even having a picnic lunch at Walden Pond. But Baha'i pilgrimage isn't anything like these. No, one simply joins a few dozen or maybe 50 Baha'is from around the world. In my group, besides Persians, there were some from Japan and Mauritius and England and Scotland, of course the US, just me from Canada, and about a dozen ethnic Italians from Ethiopia. We gather for prayers, readings, talks, and visit the holy shrines, which are mostly tombs or burial places, but also homes and even one jail cell, where Baha'u'llah, the prophet of the Baha'i faith, lived during his last years in exile. There's a set program, and often buses get you from one place to the next, so it's possible to kind of think of this as a tour. But it's also possible to bring with you your deepest pains and concerns in the hopes of psychospiritual healing. And did I mention it was July in Haifa? So sun and humidity and blazing sun, and yet darkness as well. Now, I'm not fully conscious of it at the time, but I have a subtle agenda myself. Privately, as a young Baha'i, I'm in excruciating spiritual pain about my sexuality, wondering how to adjust myself to the expectations of purity and chastity on the one side, or, and for me, unexciting marriage on the other. I even meet a lovely woman from North Dakota on this pilgrimage, and we talk and pray to see if we're led to becoming engaged. We weren't. I hope in my deepest core that this pilgrimage will solve this dilemma, presumably by dissolving it in some personal revelation at the holiest place in the world to the Baha'is. I see now how superficial and intellectual it was, that attempt simply to be obedient, but the conflict between my desires, one to be faithful and committed to my faith, and the other to be emotionally fulfilled and real as a human being, that conflict was very deep. In retrospect, it's no coincidence that within a year of my pilgrimage, I'm in psychotherapy to come to terms with myself, not to mention my buried rage, yada, 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 and I'm on the way to coming out. I have the early recognition that to be faithful in any meaningful way, I must be who I truly am, hoping that I can come to terms with God as I understand God at that time. So yes, I'm going on about this, but Father Richard Rohr, who's a spiritual guide for me online, from the Center for Action and Contemplation, focused for weeks recently, a couple of months ago, on the importance and effects of pilgrimage of many types. He gives me a metaphor with which to look back, now that I'm turning 70, on this life of progress, blockage, depression, change, and fulfillment. I realize, not for the first time, but for another powerful time, how journeys in the wilderness are rich with possibility and transformation. So when Reverend Sean asked me if I could take this pulpit today while he's away, I said yes right away, because you also are in a period of transition. And for some of you, it may feel something like a wilderness. As Rohr writes and talks about, and I admit that his thoughts and my own are so mixed up right now that you might as well just decide that anything you hear usefully in this sermon is his, because I don't remember what's mine. Let's assume that everything I say is his. As Rohr says, pilgrimages are times of emptiness and separation from ordinary life, times when the heart is seeking a new, higher or deeper connection. Pilgrimages come as either a result of inner emptiness or as a choice to empty oneself on purpose. But consider, emptiness is space, is room for something to enter. Emptiness might be a starving stomach or a suffocating vacuum, but it might also be a womb, a fertile space for implantation, growth, and evolution. We UUs tend to pride ourselves on loving the questions, not needing the answers. We certainly don't want someone else's answers. We recognize the spiritual maturity that sees doubt as necessary for faith formation, however we think of faith. And even anxiety we see at times as energy for self-examination. While serving a parish, though, too often a UU in mourning came to me saying, I don't know what to do. I don't have beliefs to help me with this. At those times, back then, my personal and spiritual wisdom weren't adequately developed to be able to say then what I think I'd say, what I hope I'd say now, which is, but beliefs might just fill in the emptiness of mourning. Don't think of faith as solving a problem. Think of it as embracing and incorporating the problem to create change. It's not an easy fix. There's something in that vacuum of loss that is essential about living. Be with it. Don't look away. Anticipate, even welcome the unknown something that may come to you. Now, I don't mean to presume that grief can't be truly overwhelming and unmanageable, and I don't presume to gloss over the pain with platitudes. Rather, I'm saying that it's possible to be paradoxically attached to grief, to the loss, to the vacuum, the emptiness, such that it makes no room for the unknown something that could bring depth to life. Perhaps the idea of mourning as pilgrimage, as a journey through and towards the unknown, might offer some comfort. Many years ago now, my long-term committed relationship comes painfully and publicly crashing down, and I am wrapped in righteous rage for about 2 years. Even more than with my ex-partner, I'm furious with God, the God as I understood God, who I thought had confirmed this love. How blind one can be, okay? I turn my back and stop praying in favor of a deep, resentful, satisfying sulk. It's awful. But one day, I decide it's time to say a little prayer for me. And although there's a longer version of this tale, in a nutshell, I say a little prayer, and a powerful, loving, accepting, personal, and flowing form of grace reaches down to me. And I am transformed. Powerful light is shone upon my world, and I see everything differently immediately. I believe at the time that that wilderness of woe has come to an end, and my gratitude is just brimming, overflowing. But that is really just the start of a significant wandering time, a pilgrimage from that place and time to I knew not where. I'm certain that I have to respond to this grace in some momentous way, but I don't know how. So in baby steps, I set out. I know I have to close my practice. My father's died. I feel like I need to move home to Fredericton. I become a Unitarian Universalist at the fellowship there, or rather, I come out as a UU because, as so many of us, I was already here in spirit, just not in body. And I start to perceive myself as following a curving path. It's eminently clear where the part of the curve I can see goes, but I only can see the next part when I get there, and then it goes someplace else. So I can only see a little bit at a time. And that curve leads me places I had no idea I would ever go, including right here today, even though I have preached to you before. The same thing, it leads me here to you today. As I mature, or at least as I think I mature, some who know me well may have a very different idea on that, the metaphor of pilgrimage, of wandering, becomes increasingly helpful. Every mature congregation recognizes in some way that it too is on an unknown path. That despite strategic plans and budget forecasts and capital campaigns, which have their use and absolute necessity, of course, but by simply responding to life, wondering and wandering is the only rich way of being, painful and mysterious though it may be. You have wandered and wondered through the long, I want to say, desert of relocation. Do we, don't we? I'm sure it seemed like the biblical 40 years in the desert, and maybe it was 40 years. I don't know how long that was on your agenda. But your curving path has brought you here. The life of your minister has changed, and so must you. The pilgrimage of interim ministry should raise necessary questions for you, again, about who you are now and who you want to be, let alone where you're going to be. You'll determine some answers and be at some new point on your curve. And speaking of curves, some curves are just thrown at you, like the eighth principle process, a very difficult curve for some congregations. You'll survive and you'll grow. For each individual, there is an end to the pilgrimage, or some say end after end after end. For a congregation such as yours, there won't be an end. Just the curves, the steps, the uncertainties, the temporary answers, the periods of fertility. And if you open your hearts and minds to it, the wondering and wandering is the life of the congregation, ever rich, ever growing, ever evolving. May you make that so.